Welcome to Murali End. My name's Mark Machado, and I am joined not as always, luckily, fortunately joined by Sri Lanka's greatest sports journalist, Estelle Vasudevan, and the Professor of Cryptology, my cousin across the pond, Dominic Machado. We are here to review Sri Lanka's series with England. Sri Lanka came away winning the third and final test at the Oval, as you probably all know now. The series result was 2-1. We're going to figure out whether or not that was a good result for Sri Lanka, or whether we should have actually expected them to, or whether they could have won the series and this was an opportunity missed. Before I do that, as per usual, I've got to do a bit of housekeeping. First, I've got to tell you about Mikey Ward Mortgage Services. If you're looking for a mortgage in the UK, in the UAE, or even in Saudi Arabia, then get in touch with Mikey Ward. I'll put the details off the mortgage brokerage in the description. If you quote Murali End, that'd be great for us. Mikey can help with first-time buyers, all the way up to people who are trying to remortgage do large, complex commercial deals. And I should probably also remind you that your house will be taken away if you don't keep up repayments. I only say that because every other advert I've ever heard from mortgages, they always say that. I also ask you to please follow us on social media as well, Murali End. We've got a WhatsApp channel as well. We'll be updating that all the time. I almost put an update about Sri Lanka beating Cambodia on penalties there, but I thought, no. You've heard enough from me today, or last few weeks. Give you guys a break. And don't forget to subscribe to the newsletter as well, muraliend.substack. Where we write great pieces about that. Some of Nick's pieces before he got sick during the tour were absolutely incredible and knockout and definitely worth your eyes. Let's get into it. Estelle, 2-1. How did you feel when Sri Lanka when Pathum Nissanka knocked off those final runs and got that victory in the third test?
Yeah, it was a great feeling, wasn't it? Because you always felt like Sri Lanka were really close during that series, and coming into it, although expectations weren't high. Once that first game was done, Sri Lanka were always kind of in the game, right throughout. Um, uh, England kept giving them opportunities to get into the game. They unfortunately couldn't close, but they did so in the last match, which was good to see because all the hard work, I think they took away some kind of result. Going back, I do think. Sorry to be negative about it, but I do think it's something that maybe they will look back and regret a little bit because they had their opportunities even in the second game, right? And some of the decisions and some of the periods of play where they weren't good really lost them those first two games. So I think there might be a little bit of regret, but overall they'll be really happy to come away with. It's just Sri Lanka's fourth win in England, right? So it's still a massive achievement. So I think they'll be happy with that too.
Dom, how did you feel about it all?
I was excited. It's in terms of timing in the U.S., the play starts at 6 a.m., which is when I'm up anyway. So I got up, I got to watch the whole thing. My son and I were counting down the runs as the chase was going on, as it was looking more and more inevitable. And it was just this really great moment to see the team win. You could tell it meant a lot to them. They really put in a spirited effort in that third test. There have been times in the last few years where it looks like Sri Lanka is just going through the motions, right? You're getting beaten down by Australia, things like that. But here they fought tooth and nail every day. Yeah, sometimes the plans went awry and things didn't look good, right? Even at the start of this test, right? We shouldn't forget that in 45 overs, England was 221 from for three, and they rebounded from this. They played really well. Every single player in the lineup contributed something. All the bowlers, all the batters, they all did their part. It was a tremendous team victory. It was also tremendous to see Pathum do what he was doing. That was an absolutely incredible innings from him. He was in total control from ball one. It seemed like he had the perfect idea of when to attack and when to defend. He was totally calm. It looked like he couldn't be shaken. And they did a lot of technical analysis on air of both Kusal Mendis and Angelo Matthews, and they compared it to Pathum Nissanka's technique, which looked really, really excellent for English conditions. His sort of side-on style, and he played with flair. He attacked. He wasn't afraid of the moment. And just two things I wanted to mention. It was the first ever time that an Asian batter scored a match-winning century in a fourth innings chase, right? Which is something remarkable. It's only been done, I think, 7 or 8 times on English soil by visiting teams, and the names there. So Bradman is one of the names that is done at Gordon Greenwich, Conrad Hunt. So it is well worth its weight in gold. And I think the other stat that's worth mentioning, it's the first time a Sri Lankan batter has ever scored a fourth inning hundreds in England, whether successful or not. So it was a special innings. It was scored at faster than a run a ball. He
I think it
looked,
was the quickest by Sri Lankan in England as well, right?
yes, quickest by a Sri Lankan in England as well. It just looked, it was brilliant to watch. And for his second match back, it was amazing. And I'll add one thing. I thought his technique looked a little off the first game. He was kind of chasing the ball around his front pad, but it's a testament to how hard of a worker he is, how intelligent he is, and how much he's willing to change his game. That even in those like 5 days, he made those tiny little adjustments that made scoring look so easy. And it's been a long time since we've seen a Sri Lankan batter look that good in a test match.
Yeah, absolutely. It was an absolute pleasure to be at the ground to watch it, especially because I'd spent the whole series telling anyone who'd listen how great he was. I was like, my two picks to watch for this series were Pathum Nissanka and Dominic Machado, and obviously Dominic stalls through with a century in the first game, and then Pathum ends it all with a century. So I felt vindicated for picking him, and I was very grateful for it. But you just, kind of the history of Murali End is almost the history of like us talking about Pathum Nissanka and how good he looks, right? And it's, I know we keep saying it, but it's like every series he's getting incrementally better, slightly better, slightly better, slightly better. And you kind of think we're a lot of Asian batters, especially, he's relatively early in his career, right? Definitely in his test career. They don't really tend to do it in England straight away. They need a couple of goes at it. But I mean, he hit the deck running, literally. The other thing that's kind of unusual about him, definitely from a Sri Lanka perspective, is how hard he runs between wickets as well, right? Like the guy is there to not just play good shots, not just to, he's not getting to 100 by getting boundaries. He's getting boundaries, but he's also running hard. Twos and ones become twos, and twos become threes. He's just an exceptional cricketer, and you just hope that he can stay on this trajectory, and kind of get into that pantheon of great Sri Lankan cricketers, because a podcast like this exists to kind of compare players like him to players that have gone by, and you just think he looks better at his age now and his level of experience than a lot of the other greats that he's trying to emulate, right? Or am I putting too much pressure on him?
I mean, I wouldn't say anything or compare him to anyone just yet. I think that's also a massive amount of pressure, right, to take on, because Sri Lanka's, it feels like, since we had such great players and these golden eras and stuff like that, right? It feels like every player who shows promise, we're suddenly so eager to put this label on them. Oh, he's the next Sangha. I mean, people were talking about Kamindu as well, right? He's the next Sangha, or next Mahela or whatever. I think it's also, and I tweeted this out as well, right? I think it's kind of a blessing that he wasn't this superstar schoolboy cricketer, and even early in his international career,
Yeah.
he had a huge number of critics, right? Because he
Yeah.
was playing limited overs cricket, and a lot of people felt like he wasn't, made for white ball cricket. But and I mean, some of the criticism was, of course, fair, right? Because of the way he made his runs. But what's great about him, and I think what's worth applauding, is the fact that he is learning and understanding his game, and he's understanding where the game is, right? And he's playing according to where the game is. He's not trying to say, like, I mean, when he was, if you look at him solely as a white ball cricketer, right? There were times early in his career where he could have said, look, I'm making runs, right?
Mm,
I'm the only one in this team making runs. Nobody else is making runs. And he could have been satisfied with that, but it doesn't seem like he was, right? He wanted to work on his game and get better. And suddenly now he is a very good T20 and ODI player. I won't say he's, the best T20 opener out there or T20 batter out there, but he's gotten much better than where he was, where he is actually he fits into the modern mold of what a T20 cricketer should be, right? Similarly, in Test cricket, like Dom mentioned, right, the way he adapted his game, it's not just talent, right? Because we've spoken about so many talented players, and you can talk about, I mean, with teams like Sri Lanka, particularly, just talent is never lacking, right? There's always talent, and there are always going to be talented players coming into the side. But what you do with that talent is really important, and I like that the fact that he is working on things and getting better and not being satisfied with being just like a good batter for Sri Lanka, but he wants to do something, like he wants to genuinely be a good batter
yeah.
globally, right? And I think a lot of that also comes from, like I mentioned earlier, that not having that pressure of being the next big thing for Sri Lanka.
Mm.
I'm sure now there'll be a little bit of pressure, but he's played international cricket for 2 years, 3 years now, right? So he's a little more mature than when he came on to the scene, and hopefully he'll be able to handle that pressure a little better than some of the other players who we've seen going in the opposite direction.
See,
Yeah,
I
I think
think.
I think I'll add one thing.
No,
I
go
was
on,
going to
Dom. You
say, I
go.
think one thing in terms of comparison to the greats, I'll say one thing that's rare about him. I cannot recall a Sri Lankan player who has adapted and changed his game to fit international cricket, as Estelle was saying, as quickly as he had. Right. So I think, one of the things about Mahela that we always talk about, people knew as soon as they saw him, this guy was going to score 10,000 runs for Sri Lanka. Pathum has worked and reworked every part of his game, always getting better. Every series we see a new set of shots. We need to see a new side to his mentality. And the thing I think Mark and I talked about last time is the lack of Sri Lanka having a talisman, someone who can win the game for you, take the game away. That is what Pathum Nissanka is coming. And that gets to Estelle's point. He plays the game to win for his side. He's not just looking to accumulate runs, have an average that looks good at the end of the day, right? He wants to play the game to win for his side. And I think probably a testament to this is how good he is at chases. So he had a full measure of that chase of 219. He was totally in control. He knew to bat at every point, and he's been brilliant batting in chases in ODIs. I think he averages something like 85 or 90. So I think that shows a batter who understands their game, who understands what it takes for the team to win, and is putting that first, right? He doesn't care about notching an average of 45 or whatever the team needs him to do. He's going to play that role and play it well. And I think to that point, and Mark, you could maybe talk a little bit more about this because you saw how the team was training. Everything I've heard is that he's an exceptionally hard worker, that he's dedicated to his craft, and that's something that's really, really important to him.
Yeah, I actually bumped into him going to a gym in Old Trafford, and obviously I don't believe in gyms, so I had to run away after I got my selfie, obviously. But and then I saw him at the nets basically every day at Old Trafford, and then I mean he'd been in the nets for hours before, like the day 2 days before the game, which I suppose is people say that's their job, that's what they're meant to do, but other players don't want to do that. They want to do different things. I think the reason why I definitely think with Pathum, you can have these conversations about him because this is what I think he wants. I think he wants to be a great. And I'm not saying the other players don't, but I think he's really got a plan in his mind about how he's gonna achieve it. Right? I think he came to England looking to score centuries, looking to have match winning knocks. He's kind of achieved it. We've talked about how he's developed his game over the years. He's pretty much the only batter we have that has gears, right? So you can bat to what's needed to how he needs to bat, and he can move up and down gears as well in any given situation. And I think he wants us to he wants to hear the fans, people who follow Sri Lankan cricket talk about him in this same breath. I don't think it's putting pressure on him, right? You can tell from the way he plays cricket that he isn't just like, he's not like a lot of cricketers are kind of approach it with, right, I'm going to score my run to this over early and then just sit it out. He doesn't do that. He takes every ball as like and sees it individually as he can, which is like what all the best batters in the world do, right? He's got the work rate. I think he's got the mentality. If he can kind of stay injury free and keep everything around him good, the environment that he's in good, then I think the ceiling is very, very, very high for him, right? Because I think we've got so many players who've got the skill set, but the mentality and the mental side of the game they haven't quite nailed down. That obviously is the harder part, right? That's much more difficult, and I don't think that's an easy fix. But I've noticed now you can tell he's obviously working on his English because he might not be talking English in interviews, but people the questions to him, right? So he's obviously there's and somewhere he's thinking, I need to, like, if I want to be a top player, I need to learn English. I need to that's how I'm going to work with the best coaches. I'm sure I may be reflecting like what I'm hoping upon him, but there's so many little things you're starting to see that are kind of contributing to him becoming the player he is, which obviously makes me like ponder one big question when you look at this series, which is why didn't they start with him in Old Trafford? I mean, he comes into the team at Lords. DDS is sitting there in a press conference going, he's the best batter in the island right now. And you kind of want to go, if he is, why did he start him? And then obviously that question gets asked, and they tell us, well, you can't drop the set player if they're not out of form. So he has to kind of wait for that first game to get out of the way because they're going to drop whoever's doesn't do well there in the top three to make room for him. So you already start the game with the back foot because two of your top three know that there's a kind of axe potentially hanging over their head. The guillotine is waiting for them. And I just think those are the little psychological game within the game that Sri Lanka lost at the beginning of this series, which put us on, which meant that we lost the first two up front. I don't know if you've got any more thoughts on that, Estelle.
Yeah, that's an interesting one because, like you said, if it was that whoever fails among Madushka or Mendis was going to be dropped, then it makes no sense to give them one game, right? I mean, to be fair, to be completely honest, what is it that Kusal Mendis showed that made them think that they should persist with him in England? I think that's a question to be asked. Maybe they were thinking they need to ease someone like Pathum Nissanka into the series, which is odd because I feel like, like it's not like Kamindu, right? Because Pathum Nissanka has been a part of Sri Lanka's white ball setup now for three years, close to 4 years, right? So he's been in international cricket and he's shown his capacity to grow and evolve as a cricketer. So that maybe shouldn't have been a concern. Kusal Mendis, for all that talent and having such a high ceiling in Test cricket, he just hasn't cracked it right against top teams. And I think Dom made a really good comment in one of our previous podcasts. He said he plays great innings, but he's not a great player. I think that is very valid for someone like Kusal Mendis. And then you can't have that type of player batting at number 3, can you? I mean, you could possibly afford a guy like him coming in lower in the order where he might, change the momentum of a game or change the game on its head once in every 10 matches, right? But you can't afford that from your number 3 batter. Who, I mean, if you look at historically, you expect your best batters to be at 3 and 4, right? Whereas for Sri Lanka, what they've done is, and I think it's quite unfair to him as well, is that, because he's done so well in white ball cricket, right? He's evolved really well in the last couple of years as a ODI and T20 cricketer. to put him in that situation where technically there are some deficiencies, I mean, at least according to the experts, right, when you're playing in conditions like you find in England, and to kind of give him that responsibility for so long, it's inviting criticism on him, whereas he doesn't really have much control over it, right? He either makes runs or he steps out. So I think Kusal Mendis is the type of player, I think, that you have to manage really well, right? So much of the game is mental now, and if you feel like a player is not mentally, there, he has doubts about how he's playing, then maybe you need to let them. It's not about dropping a player and forgetting about them, right? He is a talented guy. We know that, right? Anybody who watches him plays, they know, you can see that he's talented. But there are some areas in the game, which times in the game, where you need to let that guy sit out, right? And like Mark said, if they believe that Pathum Nissanka is the best batsman in the country, then he should have been playing in that first test, right? I can't find a reason or think of a reason why he wouldn't have been playing if that's what they were thinking.
Absolutely. I mean, I think to add to that, the fact that you tell Nishan Madushka, who
Mm.
is young in his career, okay, you got the first test, and now we're going, you better perform well in the second test or else we're going to drop you, right? Because there was one of the things that doesn't make sense to me, right? Okay, drop Kusal Mendis, fine,
Mm.
right? But give Madushka the rest of the series,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Kusal Mendes has no opportunity to show, okay, I've worked on this, I have an idea, I have a game plan. And so someone like Nishan Madushka, now you have to wonder, what role does he have in the side, right? Is Potham a full-time opener now? Is he going to open with Demuth? Um, how does Madushka break into the squad? There's the question of wicket keeper, right? He was keeping on the
Mm.
last day, not the last day, the second to last day, on the third day after Chandimal got injured, right? So are you going to ask him to keep wickets and open the batting? There's a whole series of questions that come up. And I think what players like Potham and Kamindu, right? And we should also be kind of praising Kamindu too. I thought the innings he played in the second innings was absolutely brilliant, right? Again, it was a counterattacking innings where he took the pressure on to score, right? And he kind of elevated that partnership. He got it up and running, and then DDS sort of pitched in and got started. And again, that mentality of, I'm going to go through the gears, I'm going to put pressure on the opposition, I'm going to bat for my team, is
Mm.
something that I saw really well from Kamindu. I think in the Lord's Test, he could have easily chased 100, but he was going for big shots because he knew at the end of the innings that's what he needed to do. He didn't want to leave his partners stranded. He didn't want to make them face up against deliveries. He took that onus on himself. So I think that's two things about Potham and Kamindu that's really worth kind of backing. And I think one of the things that Sri Lanka has to do is put players in positions where they don't need to do it themselves, right? Someone like Nishan Madushka should not be looking over his shoulder in his first test tour to England, right? If you're going to tell him, we think you're good enough to open the batting in England the first test, you better believe that through the next two tests as well. Otherwise, you're just setting him up for failure. You're telling him he's not good enough, right? You have to instill that self belief, right? And we're lucky that Kamindu came out of this other side of the wilderness, right? He had kind of been, he had that 50 in the first match he ever played in Australia, against Australia in Sri Lanka, and then he goes off, and it's 2 years before he plays again, right? And we're lucky that he worked on his game, that he continued to flourish, that he continued to do well. And that is exceptional rather than what the rule should be. What the rule should be is, okay, he made it into the squad, he performed, we keep him in and we commit to him. And we talked about long-term planning. There should be a plan. Okay, for the next 5 tests, right? We have 5 tests coming up. This is our squad. If someone gets injured or hurt, this is who's going to come in. But we back these players, especially the young ones. And it's a lot of responsibility when your best batters, right, are batting 4, 5, and 6,
Mm.
right? And it's a lot of responsibility to ask of these younger players to fit into positions, right? And now people are already baying for Kamindu to come in and bat at 3, right? Why? And in some ways, number three is the cannon fodder position, right? If the openers go early, you're going to have to face the barrage, right? You have to be able to do a bit of everything. And it's a lot to ask for a player who's just scored hundreds from the number seven position to jump up. So I think that number three spot is something that we need to think about carefully. We've chucked Kusal Mendis into it, even though he batted at four earlier in his career. And I think we've seen that even a player like Kusal benefits significantly from being given a clear role. We've seen that in T20 cricket. We've seen that in one-day cricket, right? Whereas the person who bats at three has to be able to do everything. They have to be able to attack. They have to be able to defend. They've got to play pace. They've got to play spin. They've got to up the run rate. They've got to soak up the pressure. You need someone who's really ready to do that. And ideally, you want one of your senior players who has a wealth of experience behind it, right? To say, okay, I'm going to stick up my hand and do it. And we've seen players much better than Kusal Mendis, right? No offense, like Joe Root, struggle because it's a really
Yeah.
difficult position to come
Actually,
in.
if you look at the, I mean, Test cricket as a whole, who are the top number three batters in the world? I mean,
Williamson, right?
Williamson is the one, right? Because Root
Yeah.
bats at four.
Yeah.
Smith
Kohli bats at
bats
four.
four, yeah, right?
Yeah.
So it is a tough place to play. I mean, look at the criticism Ollie Pope was getting, right?
Yeah.
So
Yep.
I think it also, I mean, no doubt Kusal Mendis hasn't been able to, fulfill what he needed to do at number three.
Yeah.
But you also have to keep in mind that it's not an easy position to bat. So coming in at three, you have to be patient then and allow
Yep.
him a bit of time. One thing I also wanted to add with, like, actually two things. First is like coming to getting a 50 on debut and then being dropped. I kind of think it's justified because he came in to replace DDS, right? And
Right.
then Sri Lanka's batting lineup had pretty much been settled with, Chandimal, Matthews, Kusal Mendis, and DDS in those middle order positions.
Yeah.
So I felt like it would have been, I mean, you're not leaving DDS out, right? So you have to find another position. And I think that's why they've made the switch from going for this specialist wicket keeper. So Dikwala was playing for the longest time because he
Yeah.
was the best with the gloves. To telling one of the batters, look, you need to work on your keeping and you need to keep in Test cricket so that we can accommodate another batter in the side. And like even if you look at Nishan Madhushka, right? Where did he start his career? He started as the keeper.
Yeah.
And now he's
Batting at
pushed
six,
up,
right?
pushed up
Yeah.
the order and asked to open. The other thing is, with
And then
Kusal,
everyone
sorry,
forgot that he was a wicket keeper. Sorry, just adding when he had to keep wicket.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, he
Yeah.
wasn't, he didn't seem very comfortable, did he?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. And
Uh,
England being the first place that you're
Yeah.
has to, right.
And
That's
also, surely at the back of his mind, he's thinking, look, I have to come out and bat also at the
yeah.
top of the order, right? What I was going to say was that with Pathum and Kamindu, I think it also goes to show how important it is to pick a guy when they are kind of at a peak in terms of form, even if it's domestic cricket, and even if you say that Sri Lankan domestic cricket is crap, right? That the confidence it gives them that they've made runs is surely going to affect them in some way when they come into international cricket, right? And we're seeing someone like Madhushka, who had a really prolific run, couldn't get into the team, had to wait, in the wings for a little while and come in. He's had an up and down time of it. But someone like Kamindu, although he didn't play Test cricket, he did make it into the limited overs teams, right? And so he's been able to slowly kind of prove himself, and I think most importantly prove to himself that he belongs in international cricket, and that makes the job easier when he comes to Test cricket, right? And Pathum has had such a great run in limited overs cricket over the last 2 years that he knows that he's good enough to play in Test cricket, play international cricket. He has that in his head. So I think all those things kind of affect players as well, right? Like if we look at Kusal Mendis on the other hand, maybe there is something in the back of his mind, the doubts about, my Test my test record is not great. I've only made runs against Ireland, Bangladesh, West Indies in the past couple of years. Like, all of those things work in a player's head, right? So I think it goes to show with those two in particular how important it is to pick players that are in form and are making runs in domestic cricket.
I will, Mark, I know you want to say something here, but I will say something interesting is I think the presence of a Pathum Nissanka makes someone like Kusal Mendis much better. One, because they've batted together for a long time, but two, it allows him to play his natural game. He doesn't have to say, okay, I'm going to stick around, right? That partnership between them was brilliant, right? They ran, Mark was talking about the running. They ran like I haven't seen Sri Lankan Test cricketers run for a long time, right?
I've
They
never
ran
seen
hard.
I've never seen us run like that. That's never happened before, has
Yeah.
it?
And that's a what, it's straight from the white ball game, right? Because they had
Yeah.
that rapport with each other. It's like, okay, I understand how to call ones and twos. And you saw when Demuth and Angie came in, they were both near runouts. Demuth got run out in
Yeah.
the Lord's Test, right? Because Potham was looking to get off strike and to move the run rate and to do those things. And I think one of the discussions we have to have is about what role the sort of seniors have in this squad, how they fit alongside a team that should be built around Potham and Kamindu, right? Like, I think we have enough now that we can say this team should be theirs and we should be building to maximize those two guys.
Before we get to that, can I make one point about Kusal Mendis? So I was always in the press box for all three games, and I think you two know what I'm going to say because I've mentioned it to you in our WhatsApps, and I am shocked at how much influence certain people in the press box from Sri Lanka have or seem to have over team selection. I'm also shocked how much influence the kind of noise and social media seems to have on team selection as well. I think that's a big reason why Pathum didn't start the game in Old Trafford, because online people didn't see him as a test player, and I think the outside influence coming into the camp is making Sri Lanka not make the big bold decisions that they need to make, and the big bold decisions that have led to us being successful in the past. And all I will say is I think journalism works quite differently in other parts of the world to the way it does in the kind of British journalistic culture I've grown up with. And yeah, it was quite a surprising one for me about how some people could really have a vendetta against certain players. But there you go. It's all fair in love and war, I suppose. Should we talk about the senior players? We asked the questions, and there was quite a lot of questions about it. We'll get into the questions in a bit. Angelo Matthews, I think he's he feels to me, when you're watching the side, the most senior of senior players. The kind of chatter around the team is that he never wants to retire.
Well, we know that already, don't we?
Yeah. But I mean, Old Trafford, he wasn't fielding in the slips, and like, to be brutal about it, it's actually quite painful to watch because you're like, Uncle, stop, I'll go get that ball for you. Stop running, you're gonna break down. And I mean, he was kind of a mixed fortunes with the bat, right? I really feel that we need, we don't need to know the plan, but I just hope someone somewhere in SLC has got a plan for managing the back end of his career, because he's not going to go forever, and at some point his eye's going to go, will start going, and then it's going to be really, really tragic. And quite probably what will happen is he'll just get out for like 10 or 15 ducks in a row, and then it will become a big clamour. Like, I kind of think on some level you want to leave on some sort of high.
Yeah.
No?
Yeah.
Don't misunderstand me. I absolutely love him. I think he's brilliant. And I think he's like one of the great characters of Sri Lankan cricket. And I think there was a point in time when he was like one of the best players Sri Lanka's ever produced. I still regularly put him in my top 11 all time Sri Lankan greats. But cricket's the entertainment business, right? Professional sports entertainment, and entertainment is all about timing. And he's got to know. Someone's got to tell him when his time is up, because I think it's probably a lot closer than we realise. I also understand that there is this carrot dangling over this team for World Test Championship final, which
Mhm.
obviously this team is effectively, a few couple of series wins away from getting to. So I don't think there's any chance of any of the seniors retiring before that. But I think maybe when we're out this cycle, it might be time for someone to have a word with him. I don't think it's as acute, that issue, as it is with Chandy and with Dimmoth. I know they're kind of slightly younger, though. Chandy's not that much younger than him. But the other two kind of look like, well, they can kind of field in any position for one. Um,
Right.
so yeah, I don't know what do you guys think? Am I being grossly unfair on Angelo, or do I do I have a point?
I mean, I, I I know we laugh about it and stuff, but it is sad to watch, as you say, right? Because he is one of Sri Lanka's best test batters, I would say, right? And at one point, certainly one of Sri Lanka's best all format players. It's unfortunate that it seems like his body does not want to cooperate with him. And I think that has a lot to do with the injuries he's suffered, right? Over a long career, he was one of those schoolboy superstars, right? I remember watching him as a schoolboy. He was very, very, very good, and the strain of all of that seems to have caught up with his body. And like you mentioned, Dimuth and Chandimal still look like they can physically handle international cricket, right? Whereas Matthews, it feels like has been, at least in this series, he looked really stiff in the field
Yeah.
in particular. I wonder if some of it has to do with the extra load he's taking on trying to get into, or he took on trying to get into the white ball teams, because I'm sure that would have taken a toll. I mean, there were lots of videos in the gym and, stuff like that going on. So it is sad. And I think you're right, though. I don't think Dimut for certain, or I'm like 90% sure once this cycle is done, he's done, right? He will retire. Chandimal, I think, can go on for longer. He's still making, I think of the three, he's the one who's still also making a lot of runs, right? I mean, I know he didn't have a great series here, but in general, against whatever opposition, he's been making runs. So Matthews
Chandy
will
didn't
be
have
the
a bad
one. I
series
don't
either,
see.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Chandy
He
two
had an
fifty eight,
okay.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
yeah, and even
But you
like
also have
Angelo and
to, I
Dimmoth
mean, when
had knocks.
comparing, yeah, when you're comparing him to Dimut, though, you also have to take into account that he's batting at number five, right?
Yeah,
So it's almost a different ball game altogether with Dimut having to face like the tougher overs. But I think you're right. They'll hang on for the rest of this Test Championship cycle. I hope that we see at least one or two new faces in the next four tests this year, because as you guys would know, the Sri Lanka A team is in South Africa at the moment, and Sri Lanka have two tests against South Africa later this year. So hopefully some guys who make runs there will be included, because that number three position is certainly up for grabs, right? Whether they want to bring Nishan Madhushka back in and make Chandimal continue keeping. I don't know whether that's something they'll be looking at, because he's had two injuries already, right?
Yeah.
In three tests. But yeah, that'll be interesting one. Or Sadira Samaravikram is another guy who they brought in, made runs, but then didn't really stick with, because they wanted more of a batting, a specialist batter. Uh, but yeah, I think it's probably time to go for at least for Matthews, and maybe even Dimuth Karunaratne, but it'll be it. I'm sure they'll hang on until the end of this cycle.
Yeah, I think, if you look at Angelo's sort of scores, he had 141 against Afghanistan again in February, but since then he's had 5, 22, 23, 56, a duck, 65, 22, 36, 3, 32. So, it's not absolutely terrible, but it's not good. I believe it's an average of about 25. And it's clear that there's a lot of wear and tear that goes into playing, 4 or 5 days of Test cricket.
Mm.
And I think it might be worth thinking. I understand if he wants to stick to the World Test Championship and he wants to be in the squad, but maybe for some of these home series that aren't part of the World Test Championship, could be worth seeing somebody else come in to give him a rest. Maybe even for this New Zealand series,
Give
which
him a
is part of
rest.
the
He's got a central contract, and that's all he does is play Test cricket. Doesn't need a
Uh,
rest.
you know, well, he played T20 cricket this year. He
Yeah,
played
yeah,
a lot of cricket,
that's true.
and he
That's
played the
true.
LPL, and he was opening the bowling. And I think if you want to say, okay, traveling to South Africa, that's something where you want to have Angelo Matthews, where you want an experienced guy who can handle the conditions. But I think it's time to start looking at that. I think with Chundi, right, keeping the wickets as a 35-year-old, that's again a big task. I think that's something they need to consider as well, right? Who's going to keep wickets?
But I do
And
think if he's not keeping, then surely he needs to be higher up the order, right?
yeah, he has to bat higher up the
It
order.
doesn't
And
make
I think,
sense otherwise.
yeah, no,
He could
that
be
was
the
the next
short
point.
term fix for three, right? If he's not keeping, you could just plug him in at three and be like,
Do
look,
this, yeah.
you're the best. You're the best option we've got. You're our senior player. You're one of our seniors. Like, try and give it
That
a
would be
go.
the
I mean, if we're
that
we're
would be
trying to
the
retire Dimmoth, right? So we've got two issues now. We've got an opener issue. And we've got a three issue, but it's fine. We've got
well,
Pathum and Kamindu. That's all we need. DDS is there because
yeah.
he's still captain. So
Yeah, and GDS has been good. I mean, I think the thing with Chundi is ideally that's what I would say is you want him to bat at three. He doesn't have a great record batting at three. I think he averages 19. DDS averages something like 31 or 32 batting at three, which again gets and obviously they're extremely talented players and they can do it. It's just a hard position to bat. And I would be very strongly against having someone come into the side and say, okay, go in and fill this number three position. It should be, to my mind, a senior should step up and try to take that position unless someone like Pathum or Kamindu really wants it and says, this
Hmm.
is the position where I feel most comfortable batting. I feel like I'm able to, sort of provide the most value doing that. I think, they tried Potham at three in the second test, and I'm curious where they see him playing, whether he is an opener or a number three batter. I think he could. I don't think he has any problems doing either, or he would have any problems doing either. And I think in some ways three might shield him a little bit from the new ball and allow him to play a bit more aggressively. But again, I think they have to figure out inside their camp who's going to bat at three. And I don't think it can be a quick fix option unless it's a senior. You cannot bring in a junior player and say, okay, come bat at three.
I should have mentioned this earlier, but right at the end of the press conference, and this was an answer a lot of people didn't
Oh,
get
yeah.
because but basically what happened is they had to wait for ages for Sanath to come because you have to do all the other bits when you won a test. You have to go and shake hands with everyone in London before you do the press conference. And then Ollie Pope came in beforehand, I think, and took ages. So like most of the people there's camera had died, including the Murali End camera. When for the last question was on Kusal, and Sanath actually said that him, Ian Bell, and Kandambi had been working specifically with Kusal Mendis to get him back into the team for that final test. And they see him as a good player, and they think he is good for Test cricket. So I don't think Kusal Mendis is getting dropped anytime soon. Sorry for all the Kusal haters out there.
That's
I
such a
think
weird.
he is a long
It's
term
such a
plan.
weird answer,
Yeah,
right?
it is weird because Sanath had made another weird comment about planning for Joe Root, right? So they planned for him in the third test, is it?
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
like very
They
similar to that, right? Like they did all their homework between the first and the third test. I don't get it.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with Sel because it's like, oh, we didn't think about how to get Joe Root out. What was your planning exactly if you didn't think about how to get their best batter out, right? Like, who are you planning for? Like Ollie Pope? I don't think that's what you were staying up at night doing. But one thing I will say, I will give the coaching credit. even if it was belated, it was very clear that the Sri Lankan batters had a different approach in the last test. They were all striding forward. They were coming towards the ball more. They were trying to intercept the ball at a point closer to the bowler to nullify the swing, and they weren't doing that early on. They were a lot of the early dismissals were the players were rooted to the crease and getting turned around and then taking the outside edge. So I do appreciate that they worked with them, but the idea that, hey, Kusal, sit out the second test, we'll work with you over that period and fix you up for the third test, again seems that short-term mindset where it's like, we need someone to think about the next 6 months. At least they should be thinking about much longer than that, but there should be at least a 6-month time span where they're thinking about, okay, here are the players we want to give support to. This is what we're going to work on with them, rather than saying, hey, it's the middle of a test series. We started you, we dropped you, and now we're going to put you back in after some quick fixes.
Yeah, the thing with the short-term thinking though is Sanjay Surya doesn't have a long-term contract, right? So there's no incentive for him to be thinking long-term. He wants to win the next test, right? Like, I mean, if you put yourself in his shoes, that's probably what your motivation would be, right? I want to do well in the next test. I don't care what happens in 6 months because I might not be here.
Or maybe, or, you know.
Or maybe
before we get into that, hold on. Before we get into that, because that's one of the big questions that's come up where we ask the questions. Can we talk about the bowling unit, right? Because for the first time since Test cricket began, Sri Lanka stepped onto the pitch without a spinner, as far as anyone can find out. I'm sure that's not true. I'm sure they must have not played a spin in the early 80s. But we won a test without a spinner for the first time in, I think, in any of our, like, in basically this podcast's living memory. That is quite a bold decision, especially at the Oval, because all the chatter around it going into the game was like, well, that's where Murali did his great feat, which obviously, I love Murali. He's basically my favourite player, so I'm not talking to Dan. But I think actually going and playing 4 pacers in that final test was quite a bold decision, and I wonder if it's something that in hindsight they should have done slightly earlier. If they'd had Kumar instead of Prabhat at Old Trafford, it could have been a totally different score, right? There was
Do you want to take the sell, or do you want to?
I was really surprised, to be honest, to see Prabhat being dropped, because I thought he actually did his part really well, right? He's the type of bowler in these conditions who you just need him to plug one end up and not give away any runs and just, bowl on that spot again and again and again, right? And I thought to a great extent he was able to do that. And I was very surprised when they decided to leave him out because, injuries are something we see all the time with the Sri Lankan fast bowlers, and it is a big risk taking just the 4 guys. But I thought they were brilliant. I think each one of them kind of had their own style and complemented each other really well. Milan Ratnayaka, I thought, on the back of his batting, ended up playing 3 tests. I don't think he would have got the second test if he didn't score those 70 runs in the first one, right? And then Kumara would have come in for him anyway. I was really, I think I can't remember if we did a preview for the third test, but I was really surprised that they left Vishwa Fernando out of the Lord's test after one bad game, because Vishwa Fernando has carried the Sri Lankan bowling attack for years, right? Before Asita came along. And has been that, workhorse in difficult conditions. He's now gone to England and had a good run in county cricket as well. And then you give him one game and you drop him. So I thought it was almost as if they wanted to have Vishwa in, but they knew they can't drop Asita, Lahiru or Milan. So they decided, look, the easiest thing is to drop Prabhat. And I mean, at the end of the day, it worked, right? And the conditions worked in their favor. The first day was obviously not what they expected. But I think a lot of credit. I know Pathum got player of the match, but I think Vishwa and Lahiru's spell on, was it day 3?
Yeah.
It completely changed the game, didn't it? Those 2 wickets of Root and Brook Vishwa got, which apparently they'd been planning for 2 days. Really, I mean, it was like something from the 90s, right? Something like
do you know what happened?
What?
Do you know that they basically had a Zoom call with Lasse Malinga, who told them the plan?
Are you
Of
being
course they
serious?
did.
Yeah, yeah.
Of
Yeah.
course they did,
That,
right? He seems like the only guy who is able to, give them a proper vision on
Yeah.
what they need to do.
Yeah.
uh,
You think that
yeah.
would be their bowling coach's job, but I think
Is the
I
bowling
think. I
coach
Estelle,
on
think that.
tour?
Yeah, yeah,
it's
yeah,
Akib Javed,
yeah. Oh
right?
yeah, yeah.
Oh,
He
yeah,
he he
sorry.
does he does a couple of press conferences.
Yeah.
Yes, yes. I mean, sometimes bowling plans change, right? Um, and also, I mean, imagine being the
Well,
bowling coach who's been brought in from Pakistan from their cricket to come to Sri Lanka, and then suddenly Lasse Malinga's on a Zoom call. Like, I mean, I'm not
It's
knocking it,
actually
and cultures work
kind of
differently.
genius, right? It's actually kind of
Yeah, because
genius
because
also
it's
when you
gone
think about
right.
it, because no, but also because England is playing Test cricket like limited overs cricket.
mm,
So who better than someone like Malinga, who was so adept at making up these plans
Yeah.
for dismissals to. I mean, if it was the uh, the usual Test cricket, the traditional type of Test cricket, then
Mhm.
maybe those plans wouldn't have been particularly effective. But I mean, they are kind of trying to play it like a one-day game, right? Or T20 game. So I guess it
yeah.
makes sense in that way. And Brooke was really frustrated as well with the plan, right?
Yeah, bowling
Yeah.
wide, and he was yelling at the umpires. And I think one thing that's interesting too is like they were wise to it because the Duke's ball doesn't get a ton of swing early on, and it was later on, it was like once you got to like 15, 20 overs that it was getting swing. And right, we're so used to seeing Vishwa open with the Kookaburra, right, and swing it from the get go. And when he couldn't get that early swing, we're like, what's going on with him? And
Mm.
here they realized, oh wait, he needs to be our first or second change bowler, and then he'll swing it into the pads, right, like Wasim might do or something like that. And he did it really effectively, and I think he was brilliant. Um, that third day afternoon,
Mm.
right? But it was clear that they had kind of thought about it and said, okay, we can't bowl him to start, and they had Milan Ratnayaka open with the new ball, which again is an interesting decision. Um, I totally thought this was going to backfire on them. I
Mm.
thought someone's going to break down to expect our bowlers to last 90 overs, right, without a spin option, right? Because um, Prabhas was taking up like 20, 25,
Mm.
30% of the overs by himself, right, as a safeguard. So I thought, oh no, one of these guys is going to get hurt. And then it's going to be a real disaster. And then DDS and Kamindu are going to have to come in and bowl. And they really did not bowl at all, right? That
I
was the
think
other thing.
DDS got a couple of wickets in
He
the
got
first
three
innings, but
overs, right?
that's
Yeah.
that's it, right?
Yeah. He got a
So
few overs.
so he
And
was. It only came out like the back end of the Lord's Test, but DDS was actually carrying a shoulder injury, which is why he couldn't
Mm.
bowl.
uh,
And I'll be perfectly honest with you. I just think Kamindu wasn't was only ever going to bowl like 2 or 3 overs, right? It was
Mm.
he's
yeah.
not
Yeah.
doing anything on an English pitch, right? That's not a slight on him. He's a batter, right? So
Yeah.
um, yeah, I
Say it
think it was a
louder,
massive decision.
Mark. He's a batter.
He's
No,
a
Not.
batter.
no,
Yeah.
Estelle, we don't want people to find out. We want people to just, whenever anyone asks about him, just say, yeah, the ambidextrous guy. Yeah, occasionally
Ambidextrous.
scores runs. It was so, it
He's
was
playing
so
as a
funny
spin
when he
bowling
scored a
all rounder.
century.
That's why he's batting at
Yeah,
7.
yeah, he's our big secret. Don't
But
tell anyone. Oh my gosh, you want to put it on a billboard? Jeez.
but I don't know. I was surprised. I was surprised, but I think talking about people, Lahira Kumara definitely deserves a big
Mm.
shout out.
Yep.
I mean, he came in how he wasn't an automatic starter for that first test. I still can't figure out. Right, like you think about Pathum and Kumara, right? They're match winners, right? And that's what you desperately need in cricket. You need someone to snatch victory from the other team, right? We've all seen it. We've seen Ben Stokes. If you look at his statistics, you're like, oh, he averages 35 with the bat. He averages 35 with the ball. Like he's an average player. In Test cricket, it's about those passages of the game that you turn on your head with your skill. And that's what Lahira Kumara did when he came in and bowled. He brought fire into the attack. He breathed venom into the attack. he was up and at the English batters constantly, forcing them to play. It was a really brilliant spell of bowling. I think for this series, his strike rate was 31, right? And Asita had a fantastic series. He took 17 wickets, right? His strike rate was 34. So Lahiro was a really incisive bowler. And I think he's kind of been underrated a lot by Sri Lankan fans. I posted a tweet comparing his career test stats to Lasith Malinga's, because Malinga bowled in 30 test matches, and now Lahiro has bowled in 30. And they're very close. I think Malinga, who bowled more innings, had 101 test wickets. Lahiro is now on 96, right? They strike both in the low 50s. They have a economy, exactly the same economy of 3.85. They're going to leak runs, but they get you wickets, and that's what wins test matches: the ability to take 20 wickets, playing conservatively from a bowling front, especially against a Bazball team, right? I think that's another thing that's interesting is like Kumara is the type of guy you want bowling at batters being aggressive, right? The traditional sort of, defensive bowling isn't going to do well against them. And I think that's what Prabhath did well, is he actually managed to bowl quite well defensively against Bazball. But it was a good move to go with four seamers. They all bowled really well. They all brought something different. Wishwa with his swing, Asita with his just like constant hammering of the batsmen. He's always at them. He's always looking to take wickets. Kumara with his energy, and Milan Ratnayaka kind of settled into this nice line and length where he was able to restrict scoring and keep things down, and they did well. I don't think, I said it a couple podcasts ago, I did not believe that those four seamers would have been able to take 20 wickets in a test match. And I think they took 18 because DDS took a couple in the first innings, but they were great. They were brilliant. That was what turned the match. That's what gave us an opportunity to win, was dismissing England quickly. And they bowled with a lot of heart at the end of a series where they could have been tired, injured, and ready to shut up shop.
Yeah, I think just to say about the fast bowlers, right? Sri Lanka as a whole, I don't think we've ever had a better fast bowling stock. If it's not one guy, it's the other. If two are injured, there'll be two more who will come in and give you just as much hard work, right? And I think it's often underappreciated. I mean, Kamindu was great during this series, but it's incredible to me that Asita Fernando wasn't named like player of the series for Sri Lanka, just because of, he's the highest wicket taker, right? And he's the one. It's ironic actually that he didn't really have much of an impact in the third game, but in the first two games he's the guy who's keeping Sri Lanka in the mix, right, with the ball. That's, I think, they don't really get the appreciation that's due, and that's why I said I was very surprised to see Vishwa being dropped as well after the first game. Is because they give you so much, those quicks. Kumara, another guy who's, people love to hate him in Sri Lanka, right? So many people questioning his intelligence and, whether he's fit for international cricket. But he's such a naturally gifted player. And if he can just get things right and get the opportunities and get a long run, particularly in the test side, right? I think he's still, it's not too late for him. He can be one of Sri Lanka's best fast bowlers ever, because he naturally has that X factor. He's not like someone who has to work 200% harder than everybody else to be good, right? He naturally is gifted. So it's actually quite exciting if you look at the fast bowling stocks. Unfortunately, Sri Lankan conditions don't really favor them enough that we can play three quicks, but the stocks are really great whether we look at test cricket or limited overs cricket.
Kusal Rajta didn't even have to
right?
bowl this series, right?
Yeah.
Normally, what happens is someone breaks down and then someone
Poor
else breaks
Kusal.
down. And then poor Kusal Rajta's having to bowl like 60 overs in a day. Like, it's Kusal from one side and Prabhat from the other.
I think
right?
he would have probably been effective as well, right? Like, if I think it was between him and Milan Ratnayaka. And like I said, Milan made the 70 in the first game and they were dropping him after that. But, Kusal Rajta would have been effective as well in those conditions.
Yeah, he needed a tool to put his feet up. Sorry, Tom.
They needed to rest him. No, Kumara played 4 tests this year, has 22 wickets at an average of 18.6. His strike rate is 29.4 over the course of the year, right? It's like that is the fact that he wasn't in the opening in that first test. And yeah, he had played well against Bangladesh, right? He had taken 5 wickets in one match and 6 wickets in the other. And I would go so far to say as I feel more confident in this pace bowling attack than I do in our spin bowling attack. Prabhat is very good and very good at home, but I think the depth, right, like second and third options, right, Ramesh Mendis is still trying to figure it out. He hasn't quite figured it out. I don't know if when New Zealand comes to play and they're playing at Gaul, whether you want to, play 2 or 3 pace bowlers there.
Jeffrey Van der Sar is my new mate, so I will not hear anything bad said about him. Guys, I've got an idea. We have been rabbiting on for about an hour now. People are always telling me these shows are getting on for too long. Should we end this show here now and then come back almost instantly and do the Q&A and also look ahead to what might happen with New Zealand being only 8 days away at the time of recording this? So just a reminder, we're going to do another episode. We'll record that immediately, but just so that you don't have a 2-hour-long episode in your to watch or to listen to. Stop this there. So if you haven't done so already, hit the follow, hit the subscribe, tell your friends, pass on the message that the Murali End is here, follow us on social media. We're going to be back in one moment answering your questions off the back of this test.